I'm Grace, and I'm 28 years old. My sister just told me to eat in the kitchen because adopted kids don't deserve to sit with the real family. Everyone at the table laughed like it was the funniest joke they'd ever heard. I looked around at these people I'd called family my whole life, watching them wipe tears from their eyes while my heart shattered into a million pieces. Then I smiled, reached into my purse, and dropped an envelope right in the center of Mom's good china. "You might want to call your lawyers," I said, my voice steady as steel. "We have a meeting tomorrow about Mom and Dad's will." Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Now, let me back up and tell you how we got here, because this story didn't start at that dinner table. It started 6 months ago when my world fell apart. Mom and Dad both got COVID-19 within days of each other. While my three older siblings, Michael, Sarah, and Jennifer, were too worried about their own health to visit, I was the one who moved in to take care of them. I left my own kids with my husband, David, and basically lived at the hospital for weeks. My siblings had their reasons, they said. Michael claimed his banking job was too important to risk. Sarah insisted her young twins needed her at home. Jennifer just said she couldn't handle seeing them sick. But me? I was there every single day, holding their hands, talking to doctors, making impossible decisions about ventilators and treatments. The nurses knew me by name. The doctors looked to me for answers when difficult choices had to be made. When Mom needed someone to sign papers for experimental treatment, it was my signature on the line. When Dad's condition worsened and they needed someone to stay overnight, I slept in that uncomfortable hospital chair until my back ached and my neck cramped. While my siblings sent flowers and texts asking for updates, I was living this nightmare in real time, watching two people I loved more than life itself slip away despite everything modern medicine could do. Mom died on a Tuesday morning while I held her hand, whispering promises that I'd take care of Dad and make sure he wasn't alone. Dad followed 3 days later, and I swear his last words were, "Take care of Grace." At the time, I thought he meant take care of me emotionally, help me through the grief. I had no idea what he really meant, what he and Mom had been planning during those long, painful months. The funeral was a production worthy of Hollywood. Suddenly, all three of my siblings were front and center, crying dramatically for the cameras, accepting condolences like they'd been the devoted children all along. People kept thanking them for being so strong during this difficult time, praising their courage and dedication. The irony wasn't lost on me, watching them play grieving children while I stood there hollow-eyed from 6 months of actual caregiving, actual sacrifice, actual love in action. You know what's funny about being adopted into a family that already has biological children? No matter how much your parents love you, the siblings never quite let you forget you're different. Not maliciously at first, just little comments that chip away at your sense of belonging. "Well, you're not really our sister," or "Mom and Dad chose us, but they picked you from strangers." It starts as kid stuff, playground cruelty, but it never really stops. Growing up as adults, they had mastered the art of subtle exclusion that's harder to call out without seeming paranoid. Family photos where I somehow wasn't invited because they forgot to mention the gathering. Holiday traditions that I learned about secondhand through social media posts. Inside jokes that stopped abruptly when I walked into a room, leaving me standing there feeling like an intruder in conversations about shared memories I wasn't part of. Birthday parties for my own children that my siblings were mysteriously too busy to attend, though they never missed each other's kid celebrations. It was death by 1,000 cuts, each one small enough to seem petty if I complained, but collectively devastating to someone who just wanted to belong somewhere. The message was always clear: you're family, but not really. You're included, but conditionally. You're loved, but differently. But Mom and Dad were different. They never made me feel like anything other than their beloved daughter. When I struggled in school, Dad spent hours at the kitchen table helping with homework, never showing frustration when I didn't understand something immediately. When I got my heart broken at 16, Mom held me while I cried and threatened to have words with the boy who hurt me. They came to every graduation, every recital, every important moment, beaming with pride that felt genuine and unconditional. They were my safe harbor in a family that often felt like stormy seas, the constant reminder that I was chosen, wanted, treasured. When people would make thoughtless comments about my adoption, Mom would get that fierce look in her eyes and shut them down immediately. Grace is our daughter in every way that matters, she'd say firmly. Blood doesn't make family, love does. After the funeral, we all gathered at Mom and Dad's house for the traditional meal that feels obligatory after laying someone to rest. It felt wrong being there without them. Their empty chairs at the head of the dining room table like accusatory fingers pointing at our loss, reminding us that the people who held this family together were gone forever. My siblings immediately started discussing what they called practical matters: selling the house, dividing belongings, closing accounts, handling all the tedious business that death leaves behind. It made my skin crawl how quickly they'd move from grief to greed, from mourning to money management. "We should get the house appraised soon," Michael said, cutting into his ham like we were discussing weekend plans instead of dismantling our childhood home. "Market's pretty decent right now, and we don't want to miss the opportunity." Sarah nodded enthusiastically, already mentally spending money that wasn't technically hers yet. "And we need to go through Mom's jewelry collection. She has some really valuable pieces that should be professionally appraised. That diamond necklace alone is probably worth thousands." Jennifer was already making lists on her phone with the efficiency of someone who'd been planning this conversation. "I can handle the financial accounts if you want. I'm good with that kind of organizational stuff, and I have experience dealing with banks from my job." I sat there listening to them carve up our parents' lives like a Thanksgiving turkey, feeling sick to my stomach. These people who couldn't be bothered to visit during the worst crisis of Mom and Dad's lives were now eager to claim their inheritance and profit from their deaths. The house I'd cleaned and maintained while caring for them during their illness. The jewelry I'd helped Mom organize when she was too weak to lift the heavy boxes herself. The accounts I'd helped manage when Dad couldn't remember his passwords anymore. The casual way they discussed liquidating everything that had meaning, turning memories into dollar signs, made me realize how differently we viewed family legacy. To them, our parents' belongings were assets to be converted into cash. To me, they were sacred objects that held the essence of two people who loved unconditionally. That's when Jennifer made her announcement about the family dinner with that particular smile I recognized from childhood, the one that meant she was about to say something that sounded nice but had sharp edges hidden underneath. "We should do this properly," she declared, gesturing around the table like she was hosting a board meeting. "A real family meal to honor Mom and Dad's memory. I'll host it at my place next week. We can make it a proper celebration of their lives." Michael and Sarah immediately agreed, talking excitedly about bringing their spouses and kids, making it a multi-generational gathering, turning it into the kind of event that would look good in family photos. When Jennifer looked at me, her smile had that familiar edge I recognized from decades of subtle put-downs. "Grace, you'll come too, of course, though maybe you could handle the cooking. You know how Mom always said you were the best cook in the family, and it would be such a lovely way to honor her memory." The coding was subtle, but unmistakable to anyone who'd grown up navigating these family dynamics. Come to the family dinner, but know your place. Be the help, not the honored guest. Contribute your labor, but don't expect equal treatment or recognition. Sarah jumped in with her own helpful suggestion that felt like another small blade. "Oh, that's perfect. And Grace, could you maybe bring some of those dinner rolls Mom loved so much? You know, the ones from that little bakery near your house that she always raved about? It would mean so much to have them there." I should have seen what was coming. The signs were all there, like breadcrumbs leading to a trap. The way they huddled together, whispering when they thought I wasn't looking. Their phone calls that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. The sudden interest in family dinners that somehow required my labor, but not my input or opinions. But I was still grieving, still exhausted from months of intensive caregiving, still desperately wanting to belong to the family I'd never quite fit into despite decades of trying. So I agreed, like I always did when they asked for something. I spent 3 days preparing for that dinner, making Mom's favorite dishes from scratch, buying expensive wine that I couldn't really afford, even getting my hair done because I wanted to look nice for what I thought would be a meaningful family gathering to honor our parents' memory. I showed up at Jennifer's pristine suburban home with my arms full of food and my heart full of hope that maybe finally shared grief would bring us together, as siblings should be. Maybe losing our parents would remind us what really mattered: each other, family bonds, the love that should transcend petty differences and old resentments. The first hour was actually pleasant, almost like the family gatherings I'd always dreamed of having. We shared stories about Mom and Dad, laughed about their quirks and habits, talked about preserving family traditions and keeping their memory alive. I started to think maybe I'd been paranoid about my siblings' motivations, reading malicious intent where none existed. Maybe they really did want to honor our parents' memory and support each other through this difficult time. I should have known better. I should have trusted my instincts about people who'd spent decades showing me exactly who they were. The shift happened during dessert, just as I was starting to relax and believe this might be genuine. I'd brought Mom's famous apple pie, the recipe she taught me when I was 12, and standing on a step stool to reach the counter, her patient hands guiding mine as we crimped the edges together. As I was cutting slices and serving them on Jennifer's good china, she stood up and cleared her throat like she was making an important announcement. The room went quiet, and I felt that familiar sinking sensation in my stomach, the one I'd learned to associate with moments when my siblings were about to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. Before we finish tonight, we need to talk about something important, Jennifer said, her voice taking on that artificially sweet tone she used when she was about to say something particularly cutting. Have you ever experienced that moment when you know something bad is coming, but you're powerless to stop it? That's what I felt as Jennifer smiled, that fake smile she'd perfected over the years, the one that never reached her eyes. Michael and Sarah were watching me with expressions I couldn't quite read, and I realized with a sinking heart that this whole evening had been carefully orchestrated. The pleasant conversation, the shared memories, the temporary warmth, it had all been set up for whatever was coming next. "The thing is, Grace," Jennifer continued, setting down her fork with theatrical precision, "we've been talking, and we think it's time to address the elephant in the room about Mom and Dad's estate." I felt my stomach drop like an elevator with cut cables, but I kept my expression neutral through years of practice hiding my real feelings from these people. "What elephant?" I asked, though I was already starting to understand where this conversation was heading and why they'd wanted me to cook and serve before they got to the real purpose of this gathering. Michael leaned forward, putting on his professional banker voice, the one he used when he wanted to sound authoritative and reasonable while delivering bad news. "Look, we all know Mom and Dad loved you, Grace. Nobody's questioning that. But legally speaking, inheritance usually goes to biological children, unless there are very specific provisions stating otherwise. It's just how these things work in most families." Sarah nodded sympathetically, as if she was delivering sad but necessary news that she had no control over, like reporting a natural disaster or explaining why someone couldn't qualify for a loan. "We're not trying to cut you out completely, Grace. We would never do that to you. But the house, the investments, the life insurance policies, we're talking about substantial money here. It should probably stay in the bloodline, you know? It's what makes sense from a legal and practical standpoint." I blinked slowly, processing what they were actually saying to me. These people who'd barely visited our dying parents, who'd been too busy or too scared or too important to help during the worst crisis of our family's life, were now sitting here suggesting I didn't deserve to inherit equally because I wasn't biologically related to the people who'd raised me. The audacity was breathtaking, but somehow not surprising. Mom and Dad never differentiated between their biological and adopted children. I said carefully, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. They always treated us exactly the same when it came to love, expectations, and family belonging. Jennifer waved her hand dismissively, like she was brushing away a naive child's fantasy. "Oh, Grace, you know that's just something parents say to be nice and make everyone feel included. When it comes to real money, serious wealth, people think differently about bloodlines and inheritance. It's natural. Besides, you're married to David. You have his income and support, where we all really had for financial security." The logic was so twisted, it took me a moment to untangle the layers of manipulation. Because I was married, I needed the inheritance less. Because they'd emotionally abandoned our parents during their final illness, they somehow deserved more financial reward. Because I'd found love and partnership outside this toxic family dynamic, I should be grateful for scraps. Plus, added Sarah with that particular tone of fake concern I remembered from childhood, you've been handling their affairs lately, managing their care and finances. We just want to make sure everything's been done properly and legally. No offense, but you're not exactly experienced with estate planning and complex financial management. We want to protect everyone's interests. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. They weren't just questioning my right to inherit. They were questioning my competence, my integrity, my ability to handle responsibility. I looked around the table at these three people I'd grown up with, searching their faces for any trace of the siblings I'd once loved and admired. Michael wouldn't meet my eyes, suddenly fascinated with his dessert plate. Sarah was fidgeting with her wedding ring, spinning it around her finger like a nervous tick. Jennifer maintained that brittle smile, clearly proud of herself for handling this difficult conversation so skillfully and diplomatically. That's when it hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a spontaneous discussion born from legitimate concern. They'd planned this entire evening, coordinated their arguments, chosen the setting carefully, decided who would say what and when. The family dinner wasn't about honoring Mom and Dad's memory or supporting each other through grief. It was an ambush designed to pressure me into voluntarily giving up my inheritance before the will was officially read. They'd figured if they presented a united front and made me feel guilty enough about being adopted, if they questioned my competence loudly enough and made me feel like an outsider convincingly enough, I'd just step aside gracefully and let the real children inherit what they believed they deserved by virtue of sharing DNA with our parents. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against Jennifer's polished hardwood floor with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly tense room. "Well," I said, my voice surprisingly steady considering the emotional earthquake happening inside my chest, "this has been absolutely illuminating." I walked to the kitchen and started collecting the dishes I'd brought, the food I'd prepared with love and hope for what I'd believed would be a healing family gathering. Behind me, I could hear them whispering urgently, probably deciding whether to call me back or let me leave, whether to push harder or retreat. "Grace, don't be dramatic about this," Michael called out as I loaded my serving dishes into the boxes I'd brought them in. "We're family. We can work this out reasonably. There's no need to get emotional and make this harder than it has to be." Reasonably. As if there was anything reasonable about ambushing someone at a family dinner to demand they forfeit their inheritance. As if there was anything reasonable about questioning someone's worth based on the circumstances of their birth. I turned around to face them one final time. my hands full of the pie plates that had held Mom's recipe, the dessert that had been made with memories of her patient teaching and unconditional love. "You know what I think is reasonable?" I asked, looking each of them in the eye. "I think it's reasonable that the daughter who spent 6 months caring for dying parents, who sacrificed her own health and well-being and family time, might deserve the same consideration as the children who were too busy with their own lives to help." Jennifer's carefully maintained mask slipped slightly, revealing the desperation underneath. "That's not fair, Grace. We had responsibilities, jobs, families to protect. We couldn't just drop everything like you did. Not everyone has that luxury." "So did I cut her off sharply. "I had a job, a husband, children who needed their mother, but I chose to prioritize Mom and Dad because that's what family does. Or at least, that's what I thought family does." I picked up my purse and reached inside for the envelope I'd been carrying for 3 weeks. The will reading was scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning at Henderson and Associates, the law firm that had handled my parents' affairs for over 20 years. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing my best black suit and carrying a leather portfolio that David had given me for my birthday. Inside that portfolio was the letter from my parents, along with copies of every document I'd handled during their final months: medical bills, insurance claims, financial statements, powers of attorney. I wasn't taking any chances with this family. My siblings were already there when I walked into the conference room, huddled together like they were planning military strategy or coordinating their legal assault on whatever my parents had decided. Michael had bought his wife Linda, a sharp-eyed woman who worked in corporate law and had the predatory instincts of someone who made her living finding loopholes and exploiting weaknesses. Sarah was flanked by her husband, Tom, who ran his own accounting firm and presumably understood complex financial arrangements. Jennifer sat alone, but she'd clearly been crying, her makeup slightly smudged despite obvious attempts at repair. The family lawyer, George Henderson, was a grandfatherly man in his 70s who'd known our parents since before I was adopted. He greeted me with genuine warmth, shaking my hand firmly and expressing his condolences with the kind of sincerity that comes from decades of helping families navigate loss. "Grace, your parents spoke of you often, especially during these last few months. They were so proud of you, how you cared for them, how you sacrificed your own comfort to make sure they weren't alone." I noticed my siblings exchange meaningful glances at his words. They were probably wondering if he knew about the letter I had shown them, if he'd been part of whatever plan my parents had made, if the battle they were preparing to fight was already lost before it began. George took his seat at the head of the long mahogany table and opened a thick folder filled with legal documents that would determine our family's future. "Before we begin with the formal reading, I want to address something that might prevent confusion later." He looked directly at Michael, Sarah, and Jennifer with the kind of steady gaze that came from delivering difficult news to families for decades. "Yesterday, Grace showed me a letter your parents had asked me to give her after the funeral. I assume she shared its contents with you." Michael cleared his throat with the authority of someone accustomed to taking charge of conversations. "We've heard her version of events, yes, but George, surely our parents couldn't have intended to completely disinherit their other children. There must be some mistake, some misunderstanding. Maybe they were confused or influenced while they were sick." George's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened slightly, like steel being tempered in fire. "There's no mistake, Michael. Your parents came to me 8 months ago during the height of their illness and made very specific revisions to their will. They were of completely sound mind, and they made these decisions after careful consideration and multiple conversations about their wishes." Sarah leaned forward desperately, her voice taking on the pleading tone of someone watching their dreams slip away. "But George, that doesn't seem like them. They always treated us equally growing up. They never showed favoritism or made any of us feel less important than the others. This seems so out of character for the parents we knew." "Did they?" George asked quietly. his question hanging in the air like a challenge that none of them wanted to answer. Because from what I observed during my multiple visits to discuss their estate planning, Grace was the only child present for those conversations. She was the one asking questions about their care, making sure their wishes were understood, handling their daily needs while they were dying. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic outside the windows and the subtle hum of the air conditioning system. George opened the will and began reading in his measured, professional voice that had delivered countless family verdicts over the decades. The formal language was complex and filled with legal terminology, but the meaning was crystal clear and devastating to anyone who'd expected equal distribution. Everything. The house worth $300,000, the investment accounts totaling $180,000, the life insurance policies worth another $200,000. All of it went to me. Not a single dollar was designated for Michael, Sarah, or Jennifer. They weren't even mentioned in the document except to explicitly state that they were being excluded from inheritance. But that wasn't even the most shocking part of this legal earthquake. As George continued reading through the documents, I learned about accounts and assets I didn't know existed. A savings account my parents had been contributing to for 15 years, specifically designated for my children's college education. Stock investments they'd made in my name without telling me, building wealth quietly while I struggled with everyday expenses. A small vacation fund they'd been growing, apparently planning for family trips we'd never get to take together. The total value of everything they were leaving me was close to $600,000, more money than I'd ever imagined having in my entire lifetime. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what my parents had done for me. They hadn't just left me their assets, they'd been secretly building wealth specifically for me and my family for years while watching me struggle financially. Michael was the first to explode with the fury of someone watching their inheritance evaporate. "This is insane," he shouted, jumping up from his chair so fast it rolled backward and hit the wall. "No parent leaves everything to one child unless there's undue influence involved. Grace obviously manipulated them while they were sick and vulnerable." George's voice remained calm, but carried a warning edge that suggested he'd dealt with this kind of accusation before. "I would be very careful about making accusations of undue influence, Michael. Your parents came to me independently, without Grace present, to make these changes. They were very clear about their reasoning and their desires." Linda leaned forward with a predatory intensity of a corporate lawyer who smelled blood in the water. "We want to see all the documentation, medical records proving they were competent when these changes were made, witness statements, video recordings if they exist. This kind of radical departure from normal inheritance patterns suggests coercion or diminished mental capacity." I finally found my voice after sitting in shocked silence through this entire performance. "Coercion?" I asked, looking directly at Linda with all the calm I could muster. "You mean like spending 6 months sleeping in hospital chairs and managing their medications and coordinating with doctors and cleaning their house and paying their bills while your husband was too important to visit them even once?" Jennifer started crying again, but this time it felt more manipulative than genuine, like a performance designed to elicit sympathy rather than an expression of real grief. "Grace, how can you sit there acting like you deserve all of this? We're family. We grew up together in the same house. Don't we mean anything to you after all these years?" The performance was impressive. I had to give her credit. She'd always been good at playing the victim when she didn't get what she wanted. Sarah tried a different approach, reaching across the table toward me with desperate eyes that reminded me of a drowning person grasping for anything that might save them. "Grace, please. Tom and I are struggling right now. The kids need orthodontics, and we're behind on our mortgage payments. You know, we'd do the same for you if the situation were reversed." "Would they?" Because I distinctly remembered asking for help with mom and dad's care, and all three of them had elaborate excuses for why they couldn't assist. I remembered calling Sarah specifically when dad fell and I couldn't lift him alone, and she told me she was too busy with her book club to come over. I remembered begging Michael to help with some of the financial paperwork, and he said his bank didn't allow him to get involved in family financial matters. George cleared his throat to regain control of the room that was rapidly descending into family chaos. There are a few more items to address, he said, pulling out additional documents from his folder. Your parents also left specific instructions regarding any challenges to this will. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's careful handwriting. Grace, this is for you to open if your siblings decide to contest their wishes. My hands shook slightly as I broke the seal, wondering what other surprises my parents had left for this moment. Inside was another letter in Dad's precise handwriting, along with what looked like copies of legal documents and photographs. I read silently, my eyes widening with each paragraph as I realized how thoroughly my parents had anticipated this exact scenario and prepared for it. What does it say? Michael demanded, his voice tight with the kind of desperation that comes from watching control slip away completely. I looked up at my siblings. These people who had just spent the last hour attacking my character and questioning my integrity. People who were more concerned with money than honoring our parents' memory or maintaining family relationships. It says that if anyone contests this will through legal channels, they forfeit any right to family heirlooms, photographs, or personal mementos. Everything. Mom's wedding ring, Dad's war medals, generations of family photos, all the Christmas ornaments and birthday memories gets donated to charity instead. The threat hit them harder than the financial disinheritance had. You could see it in their faces, the realization that their greed might cost them the very memories they claimed to value. Jennifer was sobbing openly now, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, it seemed genuinely emotional rather than calculated. They really did hate us, she whispered, her voice breaking with what sounded like real pain. Our own parents hated us enough to cut us out completely. The anguish in her voice almost broke my heart. Despite everything that had happened between us over the years, these were still the people I'd grown up with, the siblings I'd once loved unconditionally before life and resentment and family dynamics had poisoned our relationships. They didn't hate you, I said softly, meaning it, despite my anger. They were disappointed in you. There's a difference. Michael whirled on me with fury that had been building throughout this entire meeting. Disappointed? We all have successful careers, stable marriages, good kids. We've built good lives for ourselves. What more could they have possibly wanted from us? Your presence, I replied simply, the answer so obvious it hurt to say it out loud. Your time, your care when they needed it most, your phone calls that weren't asking for money or favors, your visits that lasted longer than an hour and weren't scheduled around more important social obligations or business meetings. The truth hung in the air like a toxic cloud that none of them wanted to breathe, because deep down, in places they didn't want to acknowledge, they all knew I was right. They'd taken our parents for granted for years, assuming there would always be time later to be better children, to show up more consistently, to prioritize family over career advancement and social status. George began gathering his papers, signaling that the official business was concluded and there was nothing more to discuss legally. Grace, you'll need to come in next week to sign transfer documents and discuss the practical aspects of managing your inheritance. The house can be transferred immediately, but some of the investment accounts will take several weeks to process through the proper channels. As everyone prepared to leave this room that had changed all our lives forever, Sarah made one last desperate attempt to salvage something from this disaster. Grace, please, can't we at least split the house? Can't we at least... It's where we all grew up together. It has so much family history and so many memories. Surely that means something to you. I thought about that house, the place where I'd never quite belonged, despite living there for decades, where my siblings had reminded me daily that I was different, where I'd always felt like a grateful guest rather than a true family member with equal standing. "You're right," I said, standing up and putting on my coat with deliberate calm. "It does have a lot of family history, most of it painful for me." I walked toward the door, then turned back to look at them one last time. These people who'd shaped my childhood and wounded my heart in ways I was still discovering. "I'll be putting it on the market within the next months. The memories there aren't ones I want to preserve or live with anymore." The drive home was surreal, like traveling through a dream where familiar landmarks looked different in strange light. In the span of 2 days, I'd gone from being the family outcast to having financial security I'd never imagined possible. I kept thinking about my parents' incredible foresight and sacrifice, how they'd been secretly building this safety net for years, while David and I struggled with bills and worried constantly about our kids' future. When I got home, David was waiting in the kitchen with coffee and concerned eyes. He pulled me into his arms as if he was afraid I might shatter. I buried my face in his chest and finally let myself cry. Not from sadness or anger, but from overwhelming gratitude for parents who had protected and provided for me even after death. "They left me everything," I whispered against his shoulder. "The house, the investments, all of it. We're financially secure for the first time in our lives." He pulled back to look at me, searching my face to make sure he'd heard correctly. When I nodded, he lifted me off my feet and spun me around the kitchen like we were newlyweds again, both of us laughing and crying at the same time. Our kids, Emma and Jake, came running when they heard the commotion. At 12 and 10, they were old enough to understand that Grandma and Grandpa had died, but too young to grasp the complexities of inheritance and family drama. "What's happening?" Emma asked, looking concerned by our emotional display. I knelt down to their level, taking their hands in mine. "Grandma and Grandpa left us some money to help take care of our family," I explained simply. "It means Daddy and I won't have to work so many extra hours, and we can do some special things together." Jake's eyes lit up with the kind of pure joy only children can express. "Does this mean we can finally get a dog?" David and I looked at each other and burst out laughing. Leave it to our children to cut straight through all the adult complications to what really mattered: family, security, and the simple pleasures that make life worth living. Over the next few weeks, I began the complex process of settling my parents' estate. The house would take months to prepare for sale. There were decades of belongings to sort through, repairs to make, and legal processes to complete that couldn't be rushed. My siblings, meanwhile, had not gone quietly into the night as I'd hoped they would. Michael called repeatedly, alternating between threats about legal action and pleading about family loyalty. Sarah showed up at my house twice uninvited, crying about her financial struggles and begging me to reconsider sharing the inheritance. Jennifer sent cards and flowers regularly, as if grief gifts could repair the damage that had been done to our relationship. But through it all, I held firm to my decision to honor my parents' wishes exactly as they had intended. The most unexpected opportunity came from someone I'd met during the worst period of my life. I was at the grocery store when I heard someone call my name. Grace Williams." I turned to see Patricia Chen, a social worker from the hospital who'd helped coordinate my parents' care during their final weeks. "Patricia, how wonderful to see you," I said, genuinely happy to encounter someone who'd been so supportive during those dark days. We chatted for a few minutes about how I was doing, how my family was healing from our loss. Then Patricia's expression grew serious. "Grace, I hope you don't mind me asking, but do you remember mentioning that you were adopted?" I nodded, curious where this conversation was heading. "I do, yes. Why?" Patricia glanced around the busy store, then leaned closer with the kind of confidential tone that social workers use when discussing sensitive cases. "There's a situation at work that made me think of you. 2 little girls, sisters, ages 3 and 4. Their parents both died from COVID complications about 6 weeks ago, and they're in our system now. My heart immediately clenched with familiar pain. Another family destroyed by this terrible disease that had already taken so much from so many people. That's heartbreaking. Do they have other family members who can take them? Patricia shook her head sadly. No close relatives able or willing to take them both. They're in temporary foster care right now, but the system is so overwhelmed with cases like this. They need a permanent home, and they need it soon. They're such sweet girls, Lily and Rose, but they've been through tremendous trauma. Something stirred deep in my chest, a recognition, a memory of being small and scared and needing a family to choose me, to see me as worth loving despite the circumstances that had brought me to them. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though I was already beginning to understand where this conversation was leading. Patricia smiled gently with the warmth of someone who'd spent her career helping families find each other. "Because watching you with your parents, seeing how devoted you were, how much love you had to give even in the worst circumstances, I thought maybe you'd want to know about them, maybe meet them at least." I drove home in a daze, Patricia's words echoing in my mind like a song I couldn't stop humming. Two little girls who'd lost everything, just like I had once upon a time. Children who needed someone to choose them, to make them part of a family, to show them that love could be stronger than loss. When I told David about the conversation, he was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what I was suggesting. "What are you thinking?" he asked carefully, recognizing the look in my eyes that meant I was already emotionally invested. "I'm thinking about what it felt like to be 4 years old and not know if anyone would ever want me," I said quietly. Over the next few months, David and I went through the intensive screening process required for adoption. Home visits, background checks, financial evaluations, psychological assessments. Emma and Jake were interviewed separately about how they felt about adding siblings to our family. Both were enthusiastic, with Emma immediately planning how she'd teach the girls to braid hair and Jake declaring he'd share his favorite toys. The process took 8 months of paperwork, interviews, and legal procedures. But finally, we brought Lily and Rose home to become part of our family. That first night, as I tucked both girls into their beds and read them the same story 3 times, Rose looked up at me with serious, dark eyes. "Are you really our mama now? Forever?" I smoothed her hair and kissed her forehead. "Forever and always, sweetheart. You're safe now. You're home." A year later, I was hosting Sunday dinner at our new house with enough bedrooms for everyone and a big backyard where all 4 kids could play safely. As I watched Emma teaching Lily and Rose to make friendship bracelets while Jake helped David grill burgers, I felt complete in a way I'd never experienced before. My phone rang during dessert, Jennifer's name on the caller ID. Jennifer. Her voice was tentative. "I saw the adoption announcement in the newspaper. You looked so happy." "I forgave you all months ago," I said when she finished apologizing. "But forgiveness doesn't mean we can go back to being family. Too much has been said and done." After I hung up, David wrapped his arms around me. "Everything's perfect," I said, meaning it completely. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about choosing love over blood and hope over bitterness. Sometimes the family we create is stronger than the one we're born into.